Welcome to Tech Simplified, and my name is Sly Gittins. I have an amazing guest, Daggie Lacis. She is going to share her amazing story, and I can't wait to meet her. You're going to love it. Make sure when you're watching this video, if you're watching it on YouTube, put some comments below. We're excited for you to hear her stories. Let's get into a quick intro to who she is. As a child, Daggie Lacis immigrated with her family to the USA in 1950, having fled Latvia homeland as a communist advance. Later, Daggie was the first woman programmer at Burroughs Communication. She was usually the only female in meetings among males in the 70s, the 80s, and as she was promoted and then named the first female line VP at Burroughs. After the Berlin Wall fell, the prime minister and the foreign ministers of newly free Latvia asked Daggie to return to her beloved homeland to update Latvia's tech and systems. Latvia could do business with the West. Would you share some of your early highlights, such as meeting the father of the digital computer and the hurdles, such as giving a presentation to the Japanese executives? Mind sharing that?
Sure. Yes, my story in IT is actually a very exciting and interesting one. And this was before it was common for women to be in programming. I just graduated from college. I asked my professor, where should I look for a job? He said, computer companies like IBM and Burroughs are looking for programmers, as well as insurance companies. I went to both, and Burroughs offered me a job for $20 a month more. In those days, I wanted more money, so I decided I'll start with Burroughs. I did not know that they gave me a series of tests. I thought that was normal. Later, my boss said, they apologized. He said, Daggie, I'm so sorry we gave you all these tests because we didn't know. This is in Indiana, Indianapolis. It was a branch of Burroughs. We didn't know whether we could hire a girl programmer. We called headquarters, which is in Detroit, said, could we hire a woman? They said, there are no rules against it. So yeah, go ahead. Just test her. And that's how it all began. It was really exciting. Burroughs quickly moved me to Detroit for a position. My career, because I was a math major, I developed some software called mathematical programming system. It was solving several sets of linear equations, trying to find the cheapest, the best solution. And in those days, the computers were not what they are today. They were air-conditioned rooms with raised floors, where underneath there were cables connecting each component, the processor unit, the printer, the magnetic tapes, the disk cabinet, etc. That's the way the world was in the mid-60s. This program went along with the technology. So if you purchased a Burroughs computer, my program would go with it to the client. And it just so happened that, and I would say this is, I think, in like late 1968, 69, when Mitsubishi Oil in Japan wanted this program along with the computer because they wanted to determine the cheapest blend of oil, making sure all of the ingredients met the requirements, but still being the cheapest cost. So therefore, they wanted my program. So my boss comes in and he said, hey, Daggie, how about presenting your program? I said, great, in Japan. I said, wonderful. So I was so excited. I called my husband and I said, guess where I have to go is Japan. And in my late 20s, I applied for a passport. A couple of weeks later, my boss calls me and he said, hey, Daggie, I'm really sorry to tell you, but they found out that you're a woman. And in Japan, women cannot handle business meetings. Of course, I was devastated, but then I remember my boss, he was wonderful. He was red as a beet, and he was so angry himself too, but that's the way it was. Then a month or so went by, and then boss calls me in again. He said, hey, Daggie, guess what? They're going to meet you in the Getty Estate in Los Angeles. And he said, I've arranged for the Burroughs plane to take you there and for the day and bring you back. I said, oh, okay. And of course, for me, as a kid, I'd just seen private planes in movies. And so it was a great experience taking the Burroughs jet to Los Angeles and then being chauffeured to the Getty Estate, which is quite nice, actually. He was a prominent oilman in the U.S. They met me and they were bowing to me and gave me two boxes, and inside were a couple of sets of beautiful pearls. Yeah, I gave the presentation in Los Angeles and we flew back that day. It was just a wonderful experience. I forgave them for not letting me go to Japan. In those early days, there were things that women couldn't do. I'm sure that's changed now. In terms of my job, they promoted me within boroughs. I went from manager of math programming, then manager of scientific programming, then manager of commercial business systems, then sales manager, which they gave me a branch for schools in the state of Michigan. And my job was to get as many clients as I could. At first, I thought, oh, geez, I know nothing about sales. I really didn't like salesmen. So I thought, no, I don't want to do it. But my husband convinced me and he said, you got nothing to lose, try it. And that turned out to be my favorite job. I kept being promoted until I became vice president. At that point, I had the honor to meet the father of the computer. His name was John Vincent Atanasoff. He was a professor at Iowa State. I asked him to come to my university conference at the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
And it was the most wonderful and intriguing story that he told about how he actually invented it. And part of it was humorous because this was in the year of 1939 to 1942. Back in 1939, he was still struggling. He knew, but there was something missing and he couldn't put it together. One night, he was sitting at his office at the university and said, this has got to stop. I'm going to get in my car and do something I haven't done very often, drive crazy fast. And he realized he'd crossed the border into Illinois. And in Illinois, you could get a drink and he couldn't in Iowa. So he saw a roadhouse and there you could have a drink. So he went inside this roadhouse. He remembers taking off his coat. He sat there, ordered a bourbon and soda and had a couple. And at the end of the second bourbon and soda, he knew exactly what the missing link was and the elements of the computer. He said, number one is he's going to use the base 2, which is Boolean, and he's going to use electronics for the media. He's going to use memory that can refresh or regenerate. And the fourth item was going to be that memory and the logic, the processor, they're going to be separate.
Yeah.
That's how it started. And I'll remember in the audience, there were some cute questions. One guy said, Dr. Atanasoff, what was the brand of bourbon you were drinking? And everybody laughed. But anyway, that's my story.
So first of all, I want to give you your roses now. Thank you for, first of all, doing the job, doing it well, excelling at it. I had another follow-up question for you is, how was your colleagues when you first got the job? Was it welcoming? Did they openly have their arms open for you? Were they okay with the idea of a lady being there? And the next thing I would ask, how did you keep the energy to keep going? Sometimes we get in these situations and you get the constant questioning and people trying to see if you actually can do the role. How did you persevere through that?
The funny thing is, in those days, I didn't really pay much attention that I was the only female. It's true, in all these jobs that I said I was in, I was the only female in meetings. But I had really great colleagues. I remember one on the job in Indianapolis, I had 9 or so guy colleagues, and I did make the coffee, but I wasn't asked to. I just felt like doing it in the morning for our team. It was a team. In those days, I took theoretical math. There was no computer at Butler University at the time. The programming classes started a little bit later after I graduated. So I had to figure this thing out myself. What is a computer? How does it work? And these guys were so kind. They really helped me.
Okay.
And I really appreciated it. That was the beginning. And after that, in each job, I hired people, I had colleagues who were my buddies. We all worked together. I guess I was really lucky because I don't feel like I was ever discriminated. I actually did things in the company that no one had ever done before. When I became VP, my job was to increase the number of education users. That's public schools, K-12, and universities around the world. In order to do that, you needed programs. And at the boroughs, Unisys at the time, we had development centers for banking and one for healthcare products. These are programs that run on the computers, but nothing for schools. So then what to do? And I realized that I would never get the funding to do our own development because I needed teachers, specialists in terms of how to do the grade reporting and all that. And it would take a long time,
Yeah.
if at all. So then my colleagues and I said, hey, Daggie, why don't we look around and see what clients Unisys has in schools and see what programs they have, and maybe they want to partner. And we did that, and that's how we found a software house out of Chicago where the software ran on the Unisys equipment. The company Burrow was merged with Sperry to make Unisys in 1986.
Okay. Yeah.
That's so the name changed from Burroughs to Unisys. I then presented purchasing this company, and the district managers, the sales guys, everybody agreed that would be great. This software company had a great record of getting new school districts. I recommended a purchase. My boss didn't want to present it to the chairman. He said, hey, Daggie, okay, I'll set up a meeting with the chairman, Blumenthal, and his vice chairman, Jacobson, and you can present it. Yeah, I said, okay. And it was one of those things where this is something totally new to the company strategy. They had never purchased a software company. It was odd because in that board meeting, it was just me, my boss, and the chairman. In those days, you had these cells. I don't know if you remember, these were these cells you put on. All right. Well, I had my first cell that said commitment to education. And the chairman says, what? You tell me. And he was so rude. He said, nah, I don't. And so I started to really, that was the only cell I used. We had a back and forth argument. And I thought I would be fired. But anyway, he then got up and he said, I got to go. That evening, I was really upset. I told my husband, I think I'm going to be fired. But I really believed in my proposal about increasing the market share with the software company. My husband said, don't worry about it. I'm sure they won't fire you. The next morning, they called me in, and he was totally different. He said, Daggie, we agreed with your proposal and you can go ahead. How do you want to do the deal? That was wonderful. But yeah, so that was something I did that they allowed me to do. And I maybe because of a female, and that was a risk the company took. And some of the people at that time didn't want to go out on a limb on anything. And this was going out on the limb. And they allowed me to do it. And I did it, and we were successful. We ended up, actually, while I was still there, we ended up by 20% increasing the number of users in schools.
Oh, that's amazing.
So anyway, that's another.
First of all, I want to commend you for having the ability to stay true. This is a great proposal. And also your husband being there, that steady rock for you to say, you know what, we'll see what happens. And also commend the company for saying, you know what, you reviewed it. This is good, right?
Yeah.
Because so many times what gets in the way of companies is their egos. But in this case, they said, you know what, we trust her. We know her. She's been continued giving us great result. Let's follow her. I think that's something I call it gems or great insights for my viewers. If you have an idea that you're really compelled, that you did the work, it's a great idea. It's okay to go to the walls for it. Be respectful, and whatever the decision happened, be strong enough to take that decision, right? Don't let it stop you or feel you. Just allow it to happen. So many times we have good ideas and then we keep it to ourselves because we're not confident enough to fight for it. In your case, you went there, you fought for your idea, and it turned out to be great.
Right.
This is the beginning of your great story.
Part one.
Part one, how did you first become involved in modernizing the systems and tech for Latvia after the fall of the Berlin Wall? How did you go from there to doing that? That had to be a crazy transition for you.
The funny thing was, I received a call from the chairman who said, would you represent me at a business meeting? This was 1990. Now, the wall fell in 89. But Latvia wasn't totally free. They said they were free, and the foreign minister and the prime minister were attending a business meeting, American executives in Washington, D.C. for a lunch. And my chairman couldn't go. He knew I was Latvian. He said, would you like to go? And I said, sure. So I arrived and I flew to D.C. that morning from Detroit. I picked up my name tag, and my name, Daggie, is my nickname. My real name is Dagnija Lacis, which is a Latvian name. So I put my full name, Dagnija Lacis. I had that pinned on my jacket. And I walked into the room and it was all these business guys. And all of a sudden, somebody taps me and says in Latvian, "Do you speak Latvian?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Oh, I think you're the only Latvian here. Could you sit next to me? I have to give a speech. And this is the very first time that I have spoken in English to an English audience." So I said, "Sure." I sat down and it turned out it was next to the foreign minister. We were talking, I ended up talking to the foreign minister, and I said, "What kind of technology do you have in Latvia?" He said, "Hey, I don't know anything about computers. In my foreign ministry, we have these huge typewriters, and that's all we have." I said, "Oh, really?" Here, at that time, we had these local area networks and workstations all networked together, and that's how we communicate. We do not use typewriters. And he said, "Could you get me some?" I said, "I can ask for a grant." And so that's the way we left it. I wasn't so sure I really wanted to do it because my husband and I, along with his father, had visited Latvia while it was still under communism in 1978. The purpose of the trip was to visit my husband's father's three older sisters. They were in their mid 80s. Andy's dad was, I think, 79 or 78, and he didn't want to travel alone. Andy wanted me to go with him. It was a hard sell, but I went. And in those days, to get into Latvia, because it was behind the Iron Curtain, you had to fly into Russia. So we flew into Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, and out of Moscow, and then Latvia in between. And it had to be through only one travel agency allowed you to do that. They had to give you the visa, and they escorted you throughout. When we flew to Latvia, we had to stay in the hotel and with the city limits. I experienced things I just didn't like. We were being rationed, like we sat down to eat. I didn't really know. I picked up 2 slices of bread. And all of a sudden, this woman in Russian, this is in Riga, Latvia, started screaming. Luckily, Andy's dad spoke Latvian and Russian.
Yeah.
He said that I ate the bread of the 4th person. I was only allowed each person only one slice of bread. That was odd. My aunt, who I was lucky enough to meet, who was still alive at the time, my mother's relative, um, she was asking me, she said, Daggie, she said, "I just have to know the truth. Did flying saucers land in Florida?" We were told they did. And I wanted to just laugh. But then I realized that she was so serious. I said, "If they didn't tell us, we don't know about it." It was always being followed, very uncomfortable feeling. I knew I never wanted to go back.
Yeah.
After we left that 78 trip, I told Andy, "That's it. I'm glad I saw it. I never want to go back." So now in 1990, when they asked me to do the grant 12 years later, I thought to myself, is Latvia really free? I
Okay.
wasn't sure. But anyway, they gave me the grant. We installed 5 workstations in the foreign ministry in December of 1990. And then in 91, as soon as this was December 1990, and January 13th, I think in 91, like a few weeks later, the communists went into Vilnius, killed several people, and tanks rolled in. I was devastated because I didn't know what was going to happen to Latvia. But anyway, everything worked out step by step. In my book, The Wall Falls, A Woman Rises, I describe all this. Part of the things I describe is I have been met by obstacles many times. Every time something happens, I just don't give up. There's always another way to solve a problem. If you know what your goal is and you figure this is the way I'm going to do it, but that doesn't work. Think out of the box. There's another way. But you can't give up. If you really feel that something is worthwhile doing, do it. And there's not one way. There's many ways to achieve it. And so the main message, I think, in my book, I wanted readers to actually read step by step what happened to me and what I did. And I think I was pretty resilient in most of the situations where many people would have quit.
And I keep applauding you because I couldn't imagine doing half the things you have done. Like, how do you solve problems creatively? Because you seem like every time you hit a roadblock, you
Yeah.
find a new creative problem to do that. And that translates perfectly to life today, right? How do you solve problems? Like when I started the Woman in Tech podcast, First thing people told me, like, how is a guy starting a woman in tech podcast? I got a daughter. I know amazing ladies, and I have a platform where I can share their stories. I got tired of hearing guys say women can't do this and can't do that. And I'm like, dang, what type of ladies are you hanging around? Because I got ladies who can negotiate you out your socks. They can sell salt to a snail. They engineers, they tycoons, they businesswomen. My wife had 2 masters by 24. My mom was amazing. She came from Barbados to America. Her and my dad worked together to give my brother, my sister, and myself a better life. I saw what these powerful women that I've been afforded to share the story. And what I also did, and I shared this in earlier and in my other podcast, is I had a board of directors of ladies and asked them, hey, I want to do this. How can I do this without making it about me? How can I truly share stories that really empower without it being about me? This is why I'm glad it led me to this, sharing your story. So again, I
Very cool.
commend you for having the will, the desire, the perseverance to continue to fight those and solve those problems, right? Because I can only imagine how hard it was to continue to move forward when you probably was set with so many setbacks. Thanks for sharing those examples. So my question is, you have a lot of small wins, large wins. What are some of your greatest triumphs? And again, just share some stories so you can paint the picture for the audience of some of your greatest achievements.
I would say in terms of modernizing the Latvia piece, I feel really good in my heart that I really did bring to Latvia modern ideas, modern technology of how the modern world works in banking and in transportation. And I gave them detailed proposals how a bank works and how, say, a shipping company works. Proposals that show each screen at a time that they could develop their own systems. Of course, my goal was to do it. I also formed a company that in 1991, because I saw there's another story why I did that. On the achievement side, I feel really good that I did that. I guess the most significant achievement I think that I did was Latvia and none of the former Soviet countries could communicate with the West. In other words, they couldn't send. There was no communications. They needed something called SWIFT, a user group that is dominant for the world of being a bank-to-bank transfer. In other words, if you're in Latvia, you want to send something to the bank in the U.S., you need to go through SWIFT. It's an organization that everybody belongs to, and you need to become a member. I actually went to SWIFT. SWIFT was a Unisys client, and because had a VP, I made an appointment. This was in Belgium, La Hulpe, very close to Brussels. I visited there in 1991, I believe it was in August, with the idea of asking them to come to Latvia and try to have Latvia fill out the forms necessary to join. I met this guy, Eckhard Stark, who said, yeah, he said, we bring in one country at a time. You are the first one to ask from the former Soviet countries. Yes, I promise you, I will be first. I will first go to Latvia than any other countries. My husband and I were in Latvia. We met him there 2 months later, where he met with the president of Latvia and conducted seminars on what it was and what it takes to join. I feel really good about that. Latvia was able to communicate earlier than any other country to the West, which is, I thought it was really good. I think I did my job in terms of introducing Latvia to the West. Another story is I just started an IT company called Baltic Technology Group. And the reason I did that was, well, we delivered the foreign minister's equipment in December of 1990. There was a cable missing. Unisys had forgotten to ship a cable. And my colleague and I, our hearts sank thinking, that's it. We can't show the local area network without the cable. But one of the people there said, hey, don't worry. I'm going to the university this evening and I'll come back tomorrow with a cable.
Yeah.
I thought, how could a student do this? He did it. Next day he came back, the cable worked. We were able to demonstrate. Because of that, I started a company thinking I'll just create a company and let these guys train them in the Western equipment and let them do the programming for the country. So that's how it started.
First, amazing. Your stories just keep getting better and better. I just loved how you creatively solved the problem. You knew for Latvia to get impact with the West, they got to have a banking system.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
luckily, that was one of your customers. You understood Swift existed for a country to talk to its peers. I think you talked about something that I like to share to my network and my audience a lot is your network worked for you in that situation. The way you solved problems, the way you showed up every day, they knew that talking with you was going to be a good use of their time. They didn't know what it was, but since they knew it was you talking, they opened the door for you. And again, that's a testament of you showing up every day, delivering results, making those relationships, and again, solving problems creatively. Because you could have went in there and said, you know what, I could do this myself. Let's create our own bank and all of this, like step by step. But you said, you know what, I know it's an easier way to do that, right? I know the person to get there, right? So again, outstanding. You started your own company before the internet, before making websites, before Google, any of this stuff to make it easy to be found, which is even more transformative because now anyone, my son who's 3 years old can click two buttons, get a website, and someone to do his LLC if he really wanted to. Is like super easier today. So
It is.
bravo for you to do that. And this ties into my question. What intrigues you about IT today, right? Because you've seen the world before,
Right.
was a part of building what it is today. So what excites you for the future?
To me, AI is the most exciting thing that's coming. And I just wonder, I keep seeing all these opportunities for AI and how it could change the world. And I think that's the next step. And we're going to see improvements coming each day. I'm following that in our company, which is still in multi technology. Our son and daughter are involved, as well as the Latvian management. Basically, we're still the Unisys experts on all their software needs. We're trying to now tie in AI right now in testing
Yeah.
for a couple of their clients. So that's where and I enjoy really run the business now. I just like to stay involved. And I think the answer to your question is AI. That's the future.
And that's great. I think you said, James, you started a company and now your children are running it, right? That's got to be an amazing feeling. I used to run track and I did the baton holding. You ran for yourself. You had to find the track. You had to train yourself almost, and you created this, right? And now it was time for you to pass that baton. You looked it in, and they're not losing steam. So they still going and pushing forward. So a testament again.
Yeah, thanks.
Like, how did you balance being a superstar in your professional life and then as a mom to do that? Gotta be challenging because now you got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-month-old. Um, Trying to maintain my ambition as an entrepreneur, as someone who just loves learning, but at the same time giving the right amount of love and attention to my children to make sure I don't fumble that baton and I'm passing it to them. I'm the first in my family, second person in my family to go to college. My mom and dad didn't go, right? I'm the first one to do it. And then I'm the first one to do IT. Me, I didn't like learning math, I had to learn on my own. I figure it out, right? A lot of failing, a lot of learning, right? So now that I got my kids, I want to make sure, like my parents did, education is the key, right? It's going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. Some things won't be fair, but it's how I show up. It's how I callous my mind to stay focused on the desires. How did you balance that fine line of being a superhero at work and then finding time to do it at home too?
Of course, Andy and I shared responsibilities.
Yeah.
He's been really my partner in all this adventure.
Yeah.
We were lucky because both of us worked. He was in the automotive industry, in the tire business here in the Detroit area, also a VP.
Yeah.
We were very lucky to have a Latvian nanny.
Yeah.
When I had my first child, Ed, in 1970, we were living in Detroit, city of Detroit in a duplex owned by Latvian families.
Yeah.
The other lady, basically the other side of the house, said, "Oh, I know a wonderful lady who could come watch little Eddie." She only lived a block away from our home. She was a former school teacher in Latvia and had just retired. So she came, as I left for work, she came in the morning. And then when I came home, she would walk home. This worked perfectly until we bought our home in the suburbs. Then we would pick her up. We would pick her up for the week. She stayed with us for the week.
Yeah.
So that all worked out perfectly. When Andy and I had to travel, both of us had different schedules, but when we were both gone, I was very fortunate to have my mom and dad from Indiana,
Yeah.
Indianapolis, drive 5 hours to stay with the kids because our nanny, Mrs. Oslins, didn't drive.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's how we got through that stage in terms of the working. My husband, Andres, and I, all kinds of things with our children, made sure that we took them to Latvian school in Detroit, and they're good kids. Our daughter is graduated from University of Michigan in biology, and she's a lawyer now, works for us, and our son is an engineer. We were just very fortunate. In the early days, you really need to have good child care, and that's the challenge.
Correct. And it seemed, again, you solved the problem creatively through a community, right?
Yes.
Mom and dad there. You
Yeah.
found someone who can not only love your children, but could teach the culture that you came from too. So she preserves some of those traditions you have, right? You don't have to teach them certain things. So I think that is pretty outstanding. I could talk to you all day, Daggie. You just have a wealth of knowledge, I can tell. One thing I always like to ask at the end of the interview is, how can the audience get in touch with you? Also, share your book one more time. I want to make sure to put your link to your book in the show notes. So can you just share how we can get in contact with you going forward?
Wall Falls, A Woman Rises is the name of the book. Yes, the audience should read it because you need to follow my activities and what happened at each step, but disappointments and how I kept going this way, that way. I think those are the things I wanted to share with people today, young people today, who many times want to give up too soon. And you shouldn't. You really shouldn't. My email for the author is Daggie at Dagnija, DAGNIJALACIS.com.
Perfect.
And I have a website too, which is DagnijaLacis.com.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to put all that information in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the YouTube description. Again, thank you so much, Daggie, for your time. It's been an absolute honor, a privilege to share your story to the world. Thanks again for coming on our show. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
I enjoy talking to you.